welcome to We Never Met, the podcast where I have interesting strangers on every single week. I don't want to mispronounce your last name. I think I know how to pronounce it, but can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so it's Phil Sklar, Sklar.
That's what I was going to go for, but I just wanted to make sure, because that's the worst when you start off and it's just like someone mispronounces your name. And can you give a little background on like what you do?
I'm the co-founder and CEO of the National Bobblehead Hall of Fame and Museum. And I've been now since about 2014, left my full-time job, corporate finance and public accounting, to run the Bobblehead Museum and start it up. Yeah,
so that sort of brings me to my first question. What got you into bobbleheads in the first place?
Yeah, so it really started with collecting baseball cards, which my dad got me into when I was, growing up. Probably had my first card when I was a few days old. And then early memories of just going to card shows and opening baseball cards with my dad. And the collection grew over time. I would always spend my, allowance money or money that I made from doing, tasks for neighbors on baseball or, sports cards. And that collection grew and have a pretty huge sports card collection too that, I haven't looked at in a long time, but that got me into collecting. And then the other co-founder, Brad, I met in middle school in Rockford, where we both grew up. Fast forward to, college, he was working for the minor league Rockford baseball team called the Rockford Riverhawks at the time. And they gave away bobbleheads for the first time in 2003 when he was working there, and he got one. We were both going to school at UW-Milwaukee. As big sports fans, we would go to Brewers or Bucks and Admirals, Wave games. And so we said, hey, let's might as well get a free bobblehead when we go to the game. So we circled the bobblehead games on the calendar and tried to go to as many of those as possible. And that's really what started the collection out.
Yeah, I remember doing that too, because there's something about getting a bobblehead at a game that's like so much better than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. You walk through, get handed that bobblehead that has, value, whether it's, sometimes they're not as valuable as others, but, you see the long lines and people, going, and especially when it's a limited, to the first 1,000 or 10,000 fans, that has even more, excitement, I think, to fans when you're like, yes, I got one. I waited in line, or, I got here in time. There's some times where we had to fight traffic or, to go to a Cubs game and get that coveted bobblehead. And, you don't know if you're going to get one because there's, they're in high demand and they're only giving away 10,000.
Yeah. What was the first one that you got?
So the first one would be that Rockford Riverhawks, Rocco the Riverhawk mascot. We have it proudly displayed on the history timeline, which has the history of bobblehead sort of intertwined with the history of the museum itself. And so, yeah, Rocco's the first one, but they sort of came in quick after that. We kept getting more and more. The collection grew from 1 to 5 and 10, and then we'd get extra ones. So we'd both get a bobblehead, but we usually only kept one. We'd trade away the other one, or sell it and buy other bobbleheads that we couldn't get elsewhere. So we couldn't go to Florida for a game. We'd go on a bobblehead collector's board and try to trade or, buy the bobblehead if we thought it was cool, especially, the mascots or some of the, players that we liked. We'd get the bobbleheads, and the collection grew, to one display case in a couple years. And then, we had to keep adding more and more.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, you can't be everywhere, obviously, so you can't go and get all these bobbleheads. So is there like a certain cap of like what you're willing to spend or like pay for a bobblehead?
Yeah, so now, teams and individuals send us bobbleheads on almost a daily basis. We're getting deliveries of people who, might be cleaning out their storage or cleaning out their, house, and maybe they have, a family of 4, so they get 4 bobbleheads at every game they go to, and they like, hey, let's send one to the museum. And there's some teams we have, like the Diamondbacks, we get a lot of bobbleheads, and I think it might be because there's a lot of Milwaukee people who now live in Arizona and know about the museum, and they're like, hey, let's send them here. So we have quite a few Diamondbacks bobbleheads, and but yeah, really from all over the country. We've got people who sometimes even bring them in when they're coming to visit the museum. We've had people from, Seattle who've family, before we actually even opened, they were coming to Milwaukee to see the Mariners play the Brewers and brought 50 different Mariners bobbleheads. So, that's really made the collection the eclectic collection that it is right now, with so many different bobbleheads representing every team, and not just sports, but all the non-sports bobbleheads as well.
Yeah. So how many do you have right now?
So in the museum itself, we have a little over 6,500 on display. We do some rotating. The overall collection, we're estimating right now around 11,000 unique bobbleheads, with a lot of extra, duplicate bobbleheads that we can use for, traveling exhibits. We've loaned out bobbleheads to different places. And so, we'll continue to grow the collection and, be able to rotate in and out. It's a time-consuming process. We have somebody right now working on cataloging the ones that aren't at the museum. Everything at the museum is cataloged, but we've continued to grow. We have more storage space. It seems like every few months needed, and an offsite fulfillment center where we also store some bobbleheads as well.
Do you guys make bobbleheads as well there, or do you like partner with someone to make bobbleheads? Because you have like some really unique ones that exist.
Yeah, so exactly. We do partner. We use a factory in China to make some bobbleheads directly for us. All bobbleheads today are produced in China, and they've really always been produced in the Asia Pacific region. But we produce some of our own. Then there's also a company that produces a lot of the officially licensed bobbleheads for the major sports teams, and we've become their really biggest customer in terms of bobbleheads and selling coming up with ideas too for unique bobbleheads, whether it's capturing a specific moment or, just having, the standard bobbleheads every year where people can go on and find the newest, LeBron James or Aaron Judge bobblehead, or really any of the hundreds of different players that, come out each year, or mascots as well. But we've grown really significantly over the past 5 years with becoming sort of the go-to source for bobbleheads. With anybody, looking to buy one at retail will often come to us and, browse our selection of, many thousand different bobbleheads for all different varieties.
Yeah. Cause like, how do you even like, you talk about, you have like over 6,000 on display. But there's like so many people and things that are out there that could be bobblehead eyes, I guess. Like, how do you even narrow down what you want to do and what you feel like is significant enough for a bobblehead?
Yeah, there's so many options out there. We have, lists of thousands of different people or characters that haven't had a bobblehead that we'd love to make into a bobblehead. We also have a board at the museum where people can put a Post-it note up of someone or something they'd like to see turned into a bobblehead. So we look at that as well. We also get emails quite frequently with people suggesting a bobblehead. And so we sort of gauge it by interest level. People say, if everybody says, I want a Taylor Swift bobblehead, it's something we put a little higher on the priority list. In mid-March, when Dr. Fauci was rising to prominence, we were getting some emails about it, and we saw Dr. Fauci donuts and socks and all these different things. And we thought, hey, he needs a bobblehead. So we came out with a bobblehead, and, within a week, it became our best-selling bobblehead of all time. So we're always out there looking at, what's trending, what's popular, and looking to put that into bobblehead form.
Has he seen that bobblehead? Like, has he responded at all?
He has, yeah. So the New York Times reporter asked him about it. Somebody in the medical reporting field who he's been in contact with, and he laughed. The reporter had been showing him different products, things people were making on Etsy, and when he found out that $5 from everyone sold was going to help get PPE in the hands of hospitals and clinics that need it, he liked that. He also talked about it on a TV interview a few days after it was released, when they talked about it, the donation component. And so we have a couple of samples going out to him next week. Oh, you do? You're sending them to him? Oh, yeah. We're sending him a couple samples, so he'll have them. And, it's been a whirlwind process now. They've just started to arrive, and they're getting shipped out. People in all 50 states, I think over 20 different countries bought one. So definitely something that sort of was beyond our wildest expectations, but definitely kept us and our staff busy during this pandemic and, in a period when the museum itself was closed.
Yeah, and that's all, I also wanted to talk about that because it's a big component of what you do too. You guys partner with a lot of like charities and nonprofits and things like that, and use some of your funds. And I wanted to talk about one of the first bobbleheads that you made for Michael Pohl, which was really a cool thing. Is that still on display there?
Yeah, so Michael's also on the timeline with Rocco the Riverhawk prominently displayed, and we really like to do that where there's a component to the bobblehead of, going to a good cause, especially if it's tied in like, Dr. Fauci's or Michael's bobblehead, where, that was the first one that we had produced. 2013, we were, me and Brad and my mom and sister were driving to see my grandparents in Iowa and my aunt and uncle in Omaha, Nebraska. And we were like, at that time, talking about, hey, let's honor Michael with the bobblehead. Wouldn't that be cool? We had this collection at that time, probably about 2,000 bobbleheads, which I don't know how we accumulated that many still. But, we were looking into the process. We had contacted a few different companies. Nobody had gotten back to us. So we were driving. We were like, hey, let's call a couple of these bobblehead companies. We finally got in touch with one of them and sort of partnered with them to have the bobblehead made. And we really had enjoyed the process from, developing, coming up with the idea to marketing and promoting it. And seeing Michael, he was, so excited when he saw the bobblehead, come to fruition. And, he went around at different sporting events promoting them. But that one we produced to help raise funds for Special Olympics. He's been in Special Olympics now for over 35 years. And also just to honor him. And, that was something that really sparked the museum. And, we probably wouldn't have started this whole process or started it at the time we did without that bobblehead. And so, it raised and continues to raise funds for Special Olympics and also awareness as well. And same with the Dr. Fauci, raising awareness for really good causes that, we're passionate about.
Yeah. And so that sort of brings me to the next thing is like, when did the collection get so large to the point where you kind of shifted your mindset and like, oh, we can actually make a museum out of this, like what sort of flipped the switch for you?
Yeah. So it was really two things. It was the Michael bobblehead in late 2013, early 2014, combined with this collection that, it started in the third floor office loft area with one display case, and then it went to a second one, and then a case in the second bedroom, and then crept down to the garage, and then we started to put some in the kitchen. It's like, okay, what are we going to do with all these bobbleheads? And that's when we were like, well, we at that point had traveled, for about 10 years to about 20 of the different baseball stadiums, on a journey to sort of go to all the stadiums. And we had accumulated these bobbleheads. We'd also visited a lot of different museums, from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum to Cooperstown, Canton, Ohio with the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Alcatraz, some really, smaller museums as well. So, I think during those experiences, we weren't thinking, hey, someday we're going to open a museum. What do we like? What should we do? But in the back of our head, we were seeing, what do we like? What works? What was a memorable experience? And we, when we sat down thinking, hey, we could have a one-of-a-kind museum dedicated to bobbleheads. There's nothing else like this. We had those experiences. And so we put those two ideas together in 2014 and said, hey, let's have an organization that produces bobbleheads and also, a one-of-a-kind museum and brand dedicated to bobbleheads.
Yeah, because before that, you were working as like an auditor, correct?
Yeah, so I started my professional career in audit at Ernst & Young, and I was there for about 3 years before moving into corporate finance. I spent about 5 years with a company headquartered in Milwaukee called Sensient Technologies, which manufactures flavors and fragrances, but I was in the corporate finance area. And then I left them to work for another company headquartered in Milwaukee in a corporate finance position. And it was about a 40 minute drive from me. So it was the first time I was really commuting, so to say. I mean, it's a short commute for people who live in Chicago or New York, but, I was driving and I was sort of thinking, my wheels were spinning, about the bobblehead opportunities. And I wasn't really loving, the corporate finance world. It wasn't, super exciting. I had recently got an MBA and wanted to get more into marketing and, corporate leadership and things of that nature. And so, corporate finance is a little bit more strictly finance. And so I wanted to do something a little more, where I could use all those skill sets. And I think starting your own business definitely puts you in that position.
Yeah. Did you one day just decide like, hey, I'm done now? Or was it like a process over time? Like, I'm getting sick of this, and you sort of easily went into the Bobblehead Museum?
Yeah, it was definitely a process. I didn't go in and, say, one morning I quit, I'm starting the museum, but it was, the process sort of happened quickly. We thought of the idea, and then we definitely spent a lot of time behind the scenes sort of hashing out what it would look like, on the weekends, nights and weekends, really building a website, developing, ideas, plans, and those things, and looking at, projections, and is this going to be sustainable, and those things that, we needed to look at before we took a leap. And then that was in, early 2014. And then by October, we determined we were ready to go. We had several different bobbleheads that were in development or ready to, go into development. And we also wanted to announce the idea for the museum. So, we knew if we were going to do that, we had to, we couldn't be working in our normal jobs and also say, hey, we're going to open a museum. So October, we both quit our jobs. Brad was working in retail sales, and I was, in corporate finance. But we made that leap and announced the idea in November, and, I've sort of been running ever since.
Was that scary for you to make that leap of just like going, even with all the planning and stuff like that?
It was a little bit, a little bit. You always have those nerves, and is it going to work? But I think we sort of overplanned, which helped a lot in terms of calming our nerves. But it was still, it's been a roller coaster ride. There's been a lot of ups, but there's also been probably twice as many downs. There's just a lot of different things. In a spreadsheet, you can easily sell 5,000 bobbleheads, but it's a lot more difficult when you actually have those 5,000 bobbleheads and you're like, hey, why are only 500 people buying these? And a couple of the early ones we did really well, but several of the early ones didn't do very well. And so we quickly learned about cash flow and real life. In corporate finance, the cash flow doesn't affect you as much. You could get fired if things go bad, but if you have a bad month or quarter, you're still getting your paycheck. But in an entrepreneurial setting, that's not always the case.
Yeah. And speaking of the museum, is there a certain bobblehead or something that people would be surprised that you have, or that they'd be like, oh, because I feel like, a lot of the sports ones people sort of would recognize or be like, oh, that makes sense that they have a bobblehead. But there have to be some like, I didn't know that was a bobblehead. There's
a lot of that. Yeah, we get that every day from visitors. You hear, even if you're not around them, you can hear gasps or, people just shocked when they're like, oh my gosh, look at all these, South Park bobbleheads. There's a bobblehead of Mr. Hanky, the Christmas poo. Like, there's definitely some really odd ones that are out there. And I think that's part of the fun with the collection and with bobbleheads in general. There's just so many, different characters and people who have been turned into bobbleheads that you would never really expect. A lot of the politicians to, advertising characters like Flo from Progressive. A lot of people are surprised to see her. And then also just the sheer number. People just don't expect to see that many different bobbleheads. And so even, when they are coming up the stairs or off the elevator to see the bobbleheads, we get a lot of gasps and some swear words like holy, whatever. So yeah. And then, kids as well are just, it's fun to see their reactions to it. It's something that, we didn't really expect from the beginning, but every age range from little kids to, the kids with their grandparents or great grandparents, finding so many different bobbleheads or, characters that, they're talking to each other about and having these conversations, grandparents telling their kids about Howdy Doody, and then the kids telling the grandparents about, some of the Marvel characters or, and just, it's really interesting to see.
I know it's sort of self-aggrandizing, but have you bobblehead yourself yet?
So yeah, Brad and I we had many bobbleheads made, sort of business card replacements or substitutes. So they have our name and phone number and email address, and we don't give them out too often, but it's a fun idea and something that we sort of did it to promote the idea of, hey, you could have a little business card of yourself, and we've done it for a few people. It hasn't been something we've really promoted, although I think it could be a fun way for people to give a substitute or a business card out.
Are they regular size or like sort of mini?
They're pretty small. Yeah, they're about 3.5 inches, and we have them on display at the museum with a little welcome panel from us welcoming visitors. So it's a fun little touch for people to see, our bobbleheads with their note welcoming visitors.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask, I know there's obviously a standard bobblehead size that you see a lot, but I recently saw even like the one, it was from a while ago, the one that Conan did that was massive. What is like the largest one that you have in the museum?
Yeah, so we had a 6 foot, little over 6 foot bobblehead of our sort of mascot that's been on display since we opened, which people have always been sort of blown away by seeing that. It's the biggest bobblehead most people will see. Although some baseball teams and a couple other teams have some life-size bobbleheads outside their stadium, but we also just got a 7 foot bobblehead during the quarantine period from a company who had an extra one produced. It's a Vladimir Guerrero, the Baseball Hall of Famer. But Conan's is the biggest. I think it's measures just around 17 feet. We actually talked to the team with Conan to see if they had any interest in giving the bobblehead to the museum or loaning it out. And I guess Conan collects his art that people make for him and other art related to himself. So I think he has a fascination with the bobblehead, even though originally they had made it to donate to the city of Chicago as sort of a joke. They had it on display and unveiled it in Chicago during some shows there. And now it's in his studio parking lot.
Yeah, it was insanely huge. They had to make them, I'm assuming, out of different materials than a standard bobblehead, right?
Yeah, so some of them, the one that we had made was actually made in the U.S., which is really unique for bobbleheads, and it's made of almost like a plexiglass type material. But the Vladimir Guerrero one, we had to bring it upstairs, and it was, I think, 350 pounds, made of a similar material. So, yeah, you can actually, they sometimes are made out of the same material. I think Conan's is probably in like 3 pieces where it was a base, the body, and the head. But I'm sure it took a big team to move that thing around.
Yeah. And just so like, I guess other people have a background and they can sort of read about this on your website too. What is like where did the bobbleheads come from? Like where did this phenomena like start?
Yeah. So it started actually, the earliest bobbleheads date back to the late 1700s. There's a picture of painting of Queen Charlotte in her dressing room at Buckingham Palace. And there's these 2 figurines behind her that are actually in the Buckingham Palace's collection still. But their heads bobble. They're on sort of a little hook type contraption that makes the heads move. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the first bobbleheads. And they were more just decoration, something that people would have in their house, originated in the Asia Pacific region. And from then, there was different bobbleheads, more just, decorations until the 1960s when bobbleheads were made of, some different characters and also for sports teams. So 1960, 61 were the first series of baseball, football, basketball, and hockey bobbleheads. And that's really what started the bobblehead phenomenon. Those were available at sporting events to purchase, not as a giveaway that we know today, but you could go to a game and buy one for a quarter, and people collected them, and a lot of kids played with them and broke them, and now some of those are worth several $1,000s. So that's how they got started. They were bobbleheads in the 70s and 80s, but they sort of died down. It wasn't the excitement that there was in the 60s or that we see today, but 1999, the San Francisco Giants gave away the first bobblehead at a game, and that's really what reignited the bobblehead craze. And all the other teams saw the lines and the excitement for that bobblehead, and the next year, most teams were giving away bobbleheads at the major league level, and soon, all the minor league teams were giving them away, and now bobbleheads are the number one and continue to be since then the number one promotional item at sporting events. They get more fans in than really any other promotion, and there's been statistical studies that really even look into a lot of different details of what gets fans to games, and bobbleheads continue to be the number one thing.
It's so interesting because I am a sucker for those too. And I don't know why. I don't know why a bobblehead is like so interesting to me, but it just is,
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, they're fun. We love our sports teams and characters, so it's a great way to show off that pride. And then, people can see the value. You can see, okay, a Steph Curry bobblehead was just given away for free to people who attended this game, and they're selling for $100 on eBay. So, it's sort of a combination of those things, but, they've held the value over time, and a lot of them have increased quite significantly. I mean, we see a bobblehead that was available at a Brewers game with a $15 ticket, 12 years ago now, selling for almost $1,000, which is, a pretty big jump.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a certain bobblehead? I know you guys have so many now, but that you like still really want but can't get for some reason?
There's quite a few that are on the sort of wish list. We have, I guess, sort of a representative bobblehead from the different categories we're looking at. But, the Supreme Court Justice bobbleheads are really hard to find. And so that we have a couple, but, we'd love to have the full collection. Or, there's some of the supersized, like 14-inch bobbleheads from the 1960s that were used as store displays. A Yankees one recently sold for $90,000, which there's only a few known in existence. One sold at auction for $60,000 a few years ago, and this one sold for $90,000 in a little bit better shape. And we'd love to have that one, or a couple something like those in the collection. But yeah, there's just so many out there that every day we're seeing bobbleheads that we haven't seen before, and we're looking at acquiring new ones and making the collection as great as it can be.
Yeah, because what is the oldest one that you have in your collection currently?
So we have some from around the turn of the century, from late 1800s, early 1900s. We'd love to get a pair from the late 1700s. A similar pair like the one in the painting that I mentioned sold for, I think, around $35,000 several years ago. So definitely some high values and some really unique bobbleheads out there. Even some of the more recent ones that have become hard to find that we're adding or getting from collectors or teams, making it a lot of fun. Most people don't come to the museum and are like, hey, you're missing this bobblehead. And then we do get some people who will say, hey, I have this bobblehead that you don't have. And we're like, yeah, it's in storage. Or we'll take them to the area and be like, oh, there it is. They're like, oh, man.
Yeah. What are the oldest ones of? Like, what are they bobbleheads of?
So they're more like generic figures, or there's a Japanese Kokeshi doll, which has it's a hand-painted, handmade doll from Japan that has a head on a little spring-type contraption. And so a lot of those, it's impossible to even date them because they're not dated. There's not a database like we can have for stadium giveaway bobbleheads. But yeah, the oldest ones are all in display together, and definitely a unique sort of collection. And a lot of the early ones from the 60s also relate to advertising or to comics, like Snoopy, the Snoopy characters, and just so many different bobbleheads. And one of the projects that we've been working on is cataloging all the different bobbleheads and making a database of all the bobbleheads that have been produced, which is a huge undertaking.
Yeah. And, it's not only a museum, but you also have a Hall of Fame, which is interesting to me. How do you decide what bobbleheads go into the Hall of Fame?
Yeah. So we had, when we first announced the idea, maybe 6 months after that, we had an idea to say, should Pete Rose's bobblehead be the first one inducted into the Hall of Fame, since he's banned from the Baseball Hall of Fame. So we did a public vote. It got some really good press for the museum and generated some good buzz. And I think it was about 94% of the people said, yes, his bobblehead deserves to be the first one in the Hall of Fame. So we inducted his bobblehead in a couple years ago. We actually had him in Milwaukee and had a little ceremony with Pete and made a bobblehead of him holding his bobblehead with an induction speech. So that was a lot of fun. Right now, his bobblehead's actually the only one in the Hall of Fame. We have planned to have a second class of a larger class of bobbleheads that go into the Hall of Fame, but it'll be a process where members and maybe some press get a vote on which bobbleheads belong in the Hall of Fame. It'll be probably some of the more iconic and more unique bobbleheads that make it in there.
Yeah, and obviously not now with our whole COVID situation, but when you are fully open, where are you guys located?
Yeah, so we're located right near downtown Milwaukee and Walker's Point, right at the edge of Walker's Point in the 3rd Ward at 170 South 1st Street. The Foundry Building, which is a turn-of-the-century building, really cool space. We have Stacked Burger Bar and Collectivo Coffee on the 1st floor, and we're on the 2nd floor. So it's a really great area close to Summerfest and within a mile or two of the Summerfest grounds and Fiserv Forum, Miller Park. So really vibrant area. We love the location. And while we're not open, people can go online and take a virtual tour of the museum. You can actually walk through. We just added it right at sort of the beginning of the lockdown during coronavirus and late March, where you can go through and really 360 degrees walk through the museum. So it gives potential visitors or people who might not be able to make it to Milwaukee a chance to look through the museum.
And what is your website?
So the website's bobbleheadhall.com, and the virtual tour is just bobbleheadhall.com /virtual tour.
Awesome. And are you guys on social media and stuff as well?
Yep. So we're Bobblehead Hall on all the different platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Try to be everywhere, and just so much going on bobblehead related. This is sort of a quieter period in terms of the sports world because all the sporting events, right today there probably have been 12 different or 20 different baseball games where bobbleheads would be given away, major league or minor league, and none of those games are taking place. So it's quieter from that respect, but we're keeping busy with sort of the non-sports bobbleheads that we talked about before.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was nice to meet you, and great talking.
Yeah, you too.